Hello, good morning. You see me? Yeah, okay. I'm still seeing Hader. Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Shipping Association of Trinidad and Tobago post-budget webinar. We welcome you all to our first webinar for October. First of all, I'd like to sorry about that. Thank you for coming. We had a few technical difficulties, but thank you. The whole point of the post-budget webinar is one of our main strategic objectives. This is our fourth webinar that Shipping Association has held, and we are thankful for all the participants that are here today. Our main aim, one of our strategic aim at Shipping Association, is raising awareness of various topics that is happening in the industry, keeping our members abreast of what's going on, making sure that you're involved, making sure that we do knowledge sharing with you all, that we take on board your input for all the various issues. Also ensuring that our key aims and objectives are followed through, such as advocacy, technical advice for our members, and also, as I said before, sharing of information. So I'll now like to hand over to our moderator for the day, Hayden Allen, and look forward to the various speakers. Thank you.
My on. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I am Hayden Allen, past president of the Shipping Association of Trinidad and Tobago. And it's a real pleasure to be here with everyone for our annual post-budget discussion. Every budget gives us a snapshot of where we are, but more importantly, it challenges us to think about where we are going. And if we're honest, the road ahead for Trinidad and Tobago has to be rooted in diversification, increasing national competitiveness, and all bringing it together for stronger economic resilience. The world around us is moving fast. Trade, technology, investment, and we can't afford to stand still. Our shipping industry is right at the center of that movement and this moment. We connect the dots, keep goods flowing, and help power the economy forward. We have got a very exciting panel for you today to go through some many topics that we would have gleaned from the budget. So quickly, I will name the panel. We have Dr. Indira Sajiwan, who is a competitiveness and trade economist. With us, we also have Dr. Valmiki Arjun, a lecturer at UWI, and he currently lectures in finance, economics, and econometrics. We'll also be hearing from Troy Prasad, current president of the Shipping Association of Trinidad and Tobago. We have Mr. Mariano Brown, the CEO of the University of the West Indies, Arthur Lockjack Global School of Business. And we also have Mr. Bevan Narayan Singh. He is currently the Managing Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Fair Trade Commission. So without further ado, we will jump straight into it with our first speaker. And coming to the mic right now, we have Dr. Indira Sajiwan, who, as I mentioned before, is a competitiveness and trade economist and thought leadership with a passion for driving sustainable economic transformation in the Caribbean. She has held leadership roles across public, private, and the academic sectors, championing evidence-based policy making and inclusive development. Indira is widely recognized for her insightful commentary on economic diversification, governance, and social equity. And she is a sought-after speaker on regional development issues. So Indira, take it away.
Thank you very much, Hayden. Can everyone hear me? Yes?
Yes, loud and clear.
Good. Yeah. Thank you very much, Hayden. I think you quickly set the scene for my presentation because I am providing an overview of the budget and really focusing on what the budget has to say with respect to this very important issue of economic diversification. Just to set the context as I see it, this obviously 2026 budget is the first official policy statement of a new administration, a UNC administration, and therefore it serves several purposes. It is the national budget, which we have grown accustomed to annually, but it really gives us the first snapshot into the thinking of this administration in terms of how it seeks to position the economy of Trinidad and Tobago going forward, as it as well seeks to manage the financial situation over this coming year. Now, when the minister presented his budget in 2013, having listened to it, what I was left with is a feeling that he sought to restore a sense of optimism and confidence in the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, while attempting to balance fiscal needs with social sensitivity, while also focusing on diversification and discipline. And I am borne out in terms of this particular conclusion by the response that I have read coming from key stakeholders. All of the chambers of commerce, for example, all of the business associations have come out feeling very good about much of what is presented in the budget. By all means, it's not perfect. By all means, there is much that we can critique. But overall, it left people with a sense of optimism and a sense of confidence and hope. The morning after the budget, I had the opportunity to present at the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association budget seminar. There's about 450 manufacturers or persons from the manufacturing sector there. And the general consensus that came from the audience was a feeling of hope that the trajectory of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, they felt, was being repositioned in a direction that they felt could result in positive growth outcomes for the country. And even Ernst & Young, in terms of their looking at the budget, they also provided a similar kind of interpretation on the budget. Now, if we look at the macroeconomic assumptions of the budget, it is I presented it in this slide, and what we're seeing is that the price assumption for oil is $73.25 per barrel. The gas assumption is $4.25 per MMBTU. And many we can argue on this that it might be over optimistic. The projections going forward appears to be less than what we are seeing the minister using as his assumption. That being said, this is what we are faced with, and it is noteworthy that this will impact about $12 billion of the government's projected revenue. That is based on that is projected for the energy sector. So on these assumptions, the government is projecting revenue from the energy sector of about $12 billion. So again, if these prices fall, that aspect of the government revenue projection will obviously fall short. The government is placing a very heavy reliance on the non-energy sector. In fact, it's projecting to get revenues of about $43.4 billion. This compares to about $33 billion for the last fiscal year. So it's about 78% of the total revenue the government is hoping to come from the non-revenue sector. And we will, as we go along, I will present you some of the measures through which the government is hoping that this will come from. So overall, the estimate is of our overall revenue situation of about $55 billion, total expenditure of $59 billion, leaving a fiscal deficit of $3.865 billion, or 2.17% of our GDP, which is excellent. And it is worth saying that I think many of us, prior to the budget, had an expectation that we would have seen the largest fiscal deficit possibly ever in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, given where the economy has been going, given the fact that we had an approximately $9 billion deficit in the last fiscal year. But this administration has sought to keep the fiscal deficit, projected deficit, at around $4 billion. And this too, as we go along, the devil could be obviously in the detail in terms of whether the government will be able to maintain this particular deficit. Some of the new fiscal initiatives that are being proposed here from where the government intends to get its revenue, and I'm sure we all are now familiar with the 0.25 asset levy on banks and insurance companies, the landlord business surcharge, increase in electricity surcharge to commercial and industrial users, not putting any of that on households, increase in excise duties, fees, and improve tax enforcement. Now, it is obvious that what the government sought to do here, it sought to place a heavier burden on finding revenue through these measures, putting it on the backs of those elements in the society that they believe could absorb it. Now, I'm very careful to use the word absorb and not afford, because it is my hope that the banks and insurance companies, landlords, for example, would seek to, certainly in the shortest of term, would seek as far as possible to absorb these costs and not pass it through onto consumers, because that really threatens the whole objective in terms of the sharing of the burden of financing the budget. So, details we could discuss, any questions and answers if you want. Now, one of the fly in the ointment, obviously, is the wage settlement and fiscal space. We know by now that this has not been budgeted for in the fiscal package that has been provided. It has been committed to. How soon we will have confirmation on this through the bargaining process is anybody's guess. But if it does come to pass in this fiscal year, I would encourage the government to try to be creative in the way it pays this off, particularly the back pay. I would recommend use of phased repayment, long-term bonds, land for back pay, in order to meet this obligation without necessarily increasing the immediate burden on the public purse. And I would also recommend very heavily that in the negotiation process, the issue of productivity is included in the bargaining process, because it's very important for enhancing productivity. Now, the upside of this is this money placed in the hand of the average public servant can result in increasing spending power, which can stimulate short-term consumption and local economic activity. So it's not all bad. It has its upside. Now, coming to the meat of what I would spend the rest of my time talking about, and it really is the issue of non-energy diversification. And I as many of you may know, if you've listened to me, I'm an extremely strong advocate of non-energy diversification. I've been calling for this now for over maybe 25 years, recognizing that the hydrocarbons will not be there forever, understanding where the world is going with respect to renewable energy and the challenges with production that is based on the use of fossil fuel. And I've therefore been calling for non-energy diversification. And in fact, it makes its way into every budget. Into every budget I have analyzed, the word diversification has found its way. Unfortunately, it has not gone much beyond verbal commitments. I find that in this particular budget, we have, and obviously it is all verbal commitment. But what I have found is that this government, this Minister of Finance, has taken it to a level that we've not seen before. He has sought in the budget provision to identify targets and approaches to the issue of non-energy diversification, which to date we have not heard. And for that, I think he needs to be commended. Now, the areas that he has focused in on, agriculture, agro-processing, manufacturing, tourism, and creative industries, are not new. We have heard about these for a long time. We've heard about sport tourism, health tourism, the fashion industry. All of these things we have heard about, but we have not seen the traction that is required for this. And the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, for a while now, we have been getting to this point, but it has not been as important as it is in this moment. And it's going to become more and more important as we go forward, as we realize more and more that the hydrocarbon sector is not going to be the place that we can rely on for sustainable long-term growth and development. Now, the government proposes, even though it has identified these sectors and it has put forward proposals, it's also saying that it plans to hold stakeholder consultations to inform sectoral export strategies. I'm not sure exactly what it is the intention is to come out of that, but this is in the budget and I'm presenting it to you for your consideration. The goal here, obviously, is to broaden the export base, generate foreign exchange, reduce import dependency, and to create jobs, all of which are things that we know. I belabor the point that the energy sector, even at its heyday, only ever generated employment for 3% of our labor force. And that is serious. We have a labor force of close to 600,000 individuals, and we have to generate sustainable jobs for them. The largesse from the energy sector was used largely by government to create employment, to be the larger employer, but we know that that has become increasingly difficult, and therefore we need the productive sectors more and more to be the ones that are generating employment. So what does this budget say with respect to these sectors? With respect to agriculture and agro-processing, it sets a target that we can now use in order to measure its performance. The objective, it says, is to decrease the food importation by 25% by 2030, in alignment with the CARICOM objective of 25 by 2030. So here is an objective that, analysts such as myself and others on this program, we can actually look and see if the government is moving in this direction. It proposes to allocate $793.7 million of the allocation to the Ministry of Agriculture to investment in irrigation, agri-tech, and fisheries. Now, this is one that I have a little bit difficulties in understanding how it's going to excise that amount of money for this purpose, because as we know, the majority of the money that is allocated to agriculture, and it remains at about $1.1 billion. So it's not that there's been a significant jump in the allocation to this ministry. We know that a significant chunk of it goes towards recurrent expenditure. So how this particular money is going to be found to do this is left to be seen. The budget goes a step further, and I particularly like this objective. It says it will identify 15 key products, and it will look at, over the next 5 years, identify three over 3-year cycles in order to focus on the developments. Now, I have always articulated that this is what we need to do. And I had put it like every year you need to maybe take one agricultural product and say, okay, this is what we're going to focus in on this year. And therefore, we could actually see the movement, because when you try to be everything to every product, it becomes watered down and you're not able to move it forward. It focuses on climate smart, climate resilience, smart AI farming, and it speaks again about crop insurance. Now, we know we've been hearing forever about crop insurance, but again, new government, let's see if they will move it forward. And this other one is very interesting. It sets a target of doubling agro exports by 2028. And in fact, says by fiscal 26-27, it hopes to reach $1 billion in agro exports. Cocoa, maruga, pepper, aquaculture are the areas that it identifies to be the priority areas for generating this $1 billion. So here we have variables, targets that we can hold the government to account. With respect to tourism and creative economy, again, to me, this is a no-brainer. This does not need a lot of effort, but we do need to rethink product development, rethink marketing, address the issue of crime, etc., for this particular combined sector to bring the kind of result that we want. The budget sets an investment target, $3 billion over 2 years, $9 billion. It's not US, I think, that's TT dollars. I made an error there. Over the next 5 years. So these are the targets that we can look at, and it hopes to generate 3,000 new jobs in this particular sector. And we know job creation is an imperative in this economy. We have a labor force, where persons are not actively participating, the term slips me, sorry, it shouldn't, of 54%. So 54% of our labor force is not actively seeking jobs through despondency, through it could be a number of things. So we obviously need to understand that better, but this is a noble target that we would need to be tracking. It speaks to PPP arrangements, not government trying to drive everything, but government in partnership with the private sector driving the development of marinas, hotels. It lists the hotels, and we know these hotels have been in play for a while now, and what we would like to see is them being fast-tracked. It talks about the expansion of cultural, medical, sport, tourism niches. Not for the first time we're hearing it. Let's see what's done here. This is new, I think, the year-round carnival city, and the notion of turtle tourism is spoken to in this budget, and a creative industry fund to develop film, fashion, and music. Now, I know we have had funds like this in the past. Mike, I question whether it has actually taken any one of these sectors in any level of development that we can look at and say, yes, state funding has served purpose. And I believe an analysis of these 3 areas need to be looked at before we go putting more money into them. Now, it singles out yachting and marine service, and I'm really very happy about this because, again, this is an area I've been speaking about for a long, long time. This, again, a really, really low-hanging fruit that we can have traction in no time. The yachting industry generated over $20 billion in US dollars in 2011. By now, we are probably generating not even 1/3 of that through poor government policy alone. And in more recent time, the issue of crime has affected it. This budget is seeking to reposition Trinidad and Tobago as a premium Southern Caribbean yachting and marine services hub. Now, newsflash to the government, we were a regional service marine hub in the early 2000s. And poor government policy resulted in that entire subsector almost being shut down. And we are now going to be resuscitating it again. But we have the comparative advantages that can allow this to happen in very quick time. It speaks of the development of new marinas, super yacht facilities through public-private partnerships. And the next set of things is critically needed is simplification of immigration. I don't know if you're all aware, but it is 15 forms that a yacht must fill out in order to enter our waters, compared to one harmonized form to enter any other of the islands around us. And our yachting industry predates the yachting industry in many of our neighboring islands. So we need to move with these things with alacrity. The issue of digital clearance, online processing, all of these things are happening all around us. And we really need to fast track these things in terms of happening. If this government wants to see the kind of results that has spoken to in this budget, these things need to be done in a very, very fast manner. So the aim, obviously, is to attract regional yacht traffic, boost repair, supplies, and marine hospitality industry. It talks about manufacturing, light manufacturing, and the SME sectors. It proposes to establish an export academy in conjunction with the IDB and the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber. So again, this is a project that is well aligned to the multilateral institutions, to the Chamber. And through this program, the objective is to train 100 export-ready SMEs annually in financing and in marketing and a whole range of issues. I think know the objective. It speaks of refocusing the Exim Bank to providing forex for exporters with a repayment option. This is a new approach, and we will see how it rolls out. But I think it is a very, very good suggestion. The establishment of a national registry of exporters, and really trying to build out trade agreements with India, West Africa, and expanding the Chile duty-free access for 213 products almost immediately. Now, so that is the non-energy diversification platform that the budget really is pushing in a way that we have never seen before, and kudos to the government for this. Now, noteworthy, I wanted to not mention these things, is the fiscal deficit and reform that is proposed in this budget. This Minister of Finance did something that has been required for a very long time. It sought to return the NIS to solvency, through increasing contribution and the gradual retirement age adjustment. I will leave it for others to maybe go into more detail. If you have questions, we can deal with that. But this was absolutely needed. The NIS in the last fiscal year, its repayment requirement was over 600 million, whereas intake was only about a little over 400 million. The result has been that the NIS has been selling its assets in order to meet repayments, and this could not have continued indefinitely. In terms of fiscal discipline, this budget creates two oversight committees. The first one, the OFAC. This committee is going to be chaired by the Prime Minister, with the Vice Chair being the Minister of Finance. And the objective here is to have oversight over the expenditure of all ministries and all major projects. So that here we are seeing a Prime Minister who is prepared to take responsibility for the expenditure over the course of the year, not wait until the end for something all right to happen. So we're hoping that this can come into play. The second committee is called the Economic Resilience Council, and this is to monitor long-term fiscal stability. This one is to be chaired by the Minister of Finance, and it is for the approval of all projects that are over $50 million. And it will have the capacity to draw on experts in order to support its work. So these are two critical elements. Now, I have a question in terms of how does this sit with what is proposed as an Economic Development Board and Council for Competitiveness. How are you going to separate the functions, or their duplication, etc.? Or can the Economic Development Board actually be the entity to do this? And then there's a significant reform of IRD and customs. Now, we know that this government rejected the Revenue Authority and said instead what it was going to do was to reform the Inland Revenue Department. There's much that is said in the budget with respect to that. I don't think that I have time to go into it, but we can discuss it going along. Now, the fiscal outlook and the risks. We can't be naive. There is much, as I have outlined, that is positive and that is encouraging in the budget. The government is proposing a deficit of 2.17% of GDP. And as I have said, this in this moment is within safe limits. But whether the government is able to maintain this deficit, it rests on a number of risks. One being the energy price volatility. We don't know what could potentially happen to the energy prices. So if it falls below what the government has projected, its revenue situation is going to worsen. There's an potential inflationary risk to the budget if the new taxes and surcharges, etc., that has been levied in order to raise revenue find their way onto average citizen. Then there is the issue of project execution delays. A lot of what is being proposed requires, in some instances, legislation be passed. That the Public Service acts with alacrity in terms of the execution and the delivery. We have not traditionally have that kind of execution take place. So unless the government of the day is able to push execution in the way that is required, then we may see there could be high risk to maintaining this particular deficit. And then there's the issue of unbudgeted expenditures. I have mentioned the one, which is the 10% wage increase. Now, I believe very strongly that for this non-energy diversification agenda to be met, a champion is needed. Much as we did with the energy sector and its development, I believe a non-energy diversification champion is required that can pull all of the elements that might be located in various ministries, that can pull it all together, that can identify the gaps, the risk, the who is responsible for what, and be on top of the goal of managing the process of non-energy diversification. I see this as either the Economic Development Board and Council for Competitiveness or the Economic Reliance Committee. We wait to hear from the government what the approach is, because a lot of people have missed what is in this budget because there is not an overarching development plan that it references, that you can go back to. And I think that's a missing link that must now be done. In fairness to the government, only 5 months into the game, it had to present a budget and maybe didn't have time to do this, but now is the time. You have the elements of it in the budget. Now is the time to pull it all together. And of course, there are upsides. There is renewed investor confidence. So if we can see that translated in person wanting to take a risk, for example, a significant mention of infrastructure activity, which we know is an immediate booster to consumption, to confidence in the economy. And if we could see that rolling out in the way that we would like, then I believe investors will have the confidence to go forward bravely and invest in the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. I think there are a lot of signals in the budget that points to areas that investment should take place. And then there is the issue of energy rebound, which could potentially happen. We know 2027, there is the expectation for increased gas to come onto the market, therefore increased supply and therefore increase our foreign exchange earning capacity once prices hold strong. So there is that to look forward to. There is the Exxon deal recently signed. There is the potential for the Dragon deal to happen again. So all of these things combine with the government not dropping the ball on the non-energy diversification acceleration, I think really speaks well for the economy going forward. Now, I just want to touch this briefly because I know there are other speakers who will go into more details in terms of the implications of all that I have said for the shipping and logistic industries, who I am in fact speaking to. One is the issue of custom modernization and the EKYC to reduuse clearance time. In fact, the budget actually commits to declaring of merchandise on the port within a 24-hour through the modernization of the Asikuda system, etc. No, we know we've been hearing about this for a long time, but new government, let's hope we could put new hope in terms of seeing it happen. And increases in non-energy export translated to higher port throughput, which benefits the shipping industry. The maritime tourism expansion focus creates new logistics opportunity for your industry. But at the end of the day, I believe very strongly there's need for private-public coordination in order to ensure that we maintain competitiveness at all times. So in conclusion, I believe that Budget 2026 represents a pivot towards non-energy diversification as we have not seen in the past, and to which I express my strongest support. I believe it attempts to balance realism, inclusion, burden sharing, and economic reform. There's much that I have not mentioned, and I do think time permits in terms of the social aspect and social programs that the budget speaks to that are about easing the burden of those and inclusion. And as a female, I just want to put a plug in for the $5 million fund that the minister is starting to address the issue of period poverty. I think this is the government really put in front of the issue of gender-based budgeting, which many of you may not know, but the Women Parliamentarian Association has been really trying to push and call for gender-based budgeting. But more importantly, this really creates opportunity for so many women and young girls in order to be able to exist and participate in the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. This very small initiative that is included in this budget, and I find it very good. And finally, the devil is always in the delivery. So execution and delivery, ladies and gentlemen, will obviously determine the success and determine whether what is put forward at the start of this fiscal year can be achieved. And it is my view that even if this, at the end of this fiscal year, all that is stated is not achieved, even if at the end of the day, the fiscal deficit is significantly larger than is projected, if the government can report that it has made enough progress in these critical areas of pivoting the economy of Trinidad and Tobago and more towards sustainable non-energy diversification and growth, I think that we will be well on our way to success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Indira, for a very passionate presentation. As usual, you did a great job in terms of summarizing the key points within the budget. I just want to put a few broad things I always put on my ideas board in my mind. The non-energy goal. I mean, we heard so much that I think they actually got very good at stating it. This budget and in previous one, broadening the export base, generating foreign exchange, reducing the import dependency, and creating jobs. I think that speaks a lot in terms of an objective, something they are working towards. I will note the maritime and shipping industry is critical to that in terms of the institutions, the processes, the technology we have therein. So there are some opportunities. And he spoke about doubling the agro exports and reaching $1 billion within a certain time period. They don't have. Doubling it, so there is opportunity there. I think the host has forgotten to put back on my camera because I'm trying to get it on and I'm not seeing myself. But my voice is known. So in terms of doubling the exports of agri-goods, that is an opportunity for the private sector because therein we need to make sure that our ports are able to handle. Do we have the capacity to deal with a large influx of refrigerated goods because that agriculture stuff is perishable? Do we have the infrastructure, the facilities to handle that? So there are opportunities there, and you also went into the risk. And I mean, there is no short-term risk really, but there's also the political risk currently in terms of pushing things forward and getting resistance from the other side and so on. We always have to be mindful of that. But thank you very much, and we will continue with the discussion. So coming to our next panelist to speak now, we have Dr. Valmiki Arjun. He is a lecturer at the University of the West Indies, where he currently lectures in finance, economics, and econometrics at the Department of Management Studies. Prior to joining UE, he lectured in financial and macroeconomics at the University of Nottingham in the UK and at their campus in Ningbo, China. He holds a PhD in financial economics from the University of Nottingham and professional credentials in financial technology from the University of Oxford. Dr. Arjun also collaborates on several research projects with regional central banks, the International American Development Bank, and the World Bank. He's also a regular commentator on the local and regional media on economics and financial matters. Dr. Arjun currently serves on the Council of the Institute of Banking and Finance of Trinidad and Tobago, where he plays a key role in promoting professional education in the local banking and finance sector. He is also a member of several professional international economic associations, including the Royal Economic Society, the Leverhulme Institute of Globalization and Economic Policy, and the Western Economics Association. In the past 6 years, he has also worked closely with several chambers of commerce throughout the Caribbean region and currently serves as the Vice President of the Board of Directors of the Shogunas Chamber of Industry and Commerce. He is a board member of the Maritime Capital, a leading investment management firm in Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Arjun also travels regularly to present his research on emerging financial markets at many economic and financial conferences, both academic and professional. In addition, he supervises MSc and PhD thesis at UE and has also published several of his research studies. So, without further ado, Dr. Arjun, he will be the next speaker. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. And you all are seeing my screen, right? The post-budget presentation is the orange screen.
Yes, we are seeing your screen and everything.
Okay, great. Right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you very much again for the invitation to be here this morning and to give my thoughts on the budget. So first of all, I think it's important to consider how our economy would have evolved within the last decade or so. We know energy accounts for a significant chunk of our economy, our GDP. About 40% when the sector performs well, but then it trends down to about 30% when production tends to be quite low. But largely because of the low production levels in the last decade, our economy would have declined by about 16.8% between 2016 and 2024. Our public finances and by extension, the budget is very vulnerable to the energy cycle. So of course, given that oil and gas prices and production levels are low, revenues earned from the energy companies, be it taxes, the royalties, even dividends, would have taken a serious hit, which is a major reason that we've had persistent fiscal deficits in the past decade, with the exception, of course, of 2022, when we had a small surplus because of, well, the Russia-Ukraine war, when prices rose and were very much in our favor. Now, what compounded the fiscal deficits were, of course, deficiencies in tax collection and our tax administration. And of course, any growth in the revenue base of the non-energy sector turned out to be quite limited and not enough to offset the decline in the energy revenues in most years. Since 2016, the total deficit that we would have seen so far is about 79.75 billion, meaning that in the last decade, we spent about 79.75 billion more than what was actually earned in revenues. So we're spending more than what we're earning. And when we consider this figure, it's quite insignificant amounts. And since we're spending more than what we're earning, we had little choice but to borrow to make up for the shortfall. And that would have brought the debt to GDP ratio to about 85%. Now, the fall in energy production also meant reduced exports. And energy tends to account for about 80% of our exports. Now, exports are what really drives foreign exchange, at least in the official economy anyway. So therefore, with the decline in energy production leading to a decline in exports, it meant that our current account surplus, it's been averaging about $1.5 billion US annually between 2016 and 2024. But that is actually down from an annual average of about 4.1 billion from 2010 to 2015. Our reserves, given the drop in exports, it fell by about 51%. It's about 4.61 billion currently. But what we also have to consider is that the last administration have been artificially propping it up by borrowing from abroad and also by withdrawing funds from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, because we don't spend US dollars locally. So when we borrow from abroad or withdraw from the fund, the central bank converts that US to TT dollars. So when they convert that US, it goes into the foreign reserve account. And just as our fiscal fortunes move with the energy cycle, so too does our credit ratings. And that caused us to be downgraded 3 times each by S&P and Moody's, taking us to BBB- under S&P, and of course into the speculative grade region as Ba2 under Moody's. So gas is a major commodity that drives our economy, of course. But production levels would have fallen by well over 33% since the last decade. In fact, it fell by about 47% in the last decade or so. Sorry, not the last decade, since 2010. But what really caused the decline in our production? First of all, our province is very mature. Much of what we've been doing is developing existing fields, legacy fields. But given that reservoirs are maturing, output from the fields have been declining, and the pace at which we've brought new fields online hasn't really been able to offset this decline. Exploration activities slowed quite significantly. In fact, there was a 7-year gap in blocks being awarded. We didn't award any blocks for exploration between 2015 and 2022, which is a travesty in my opinion, because if we consider ourselves to be a first world, at least with the energy sector, having a very highly developed and sophisticated energy sector, how come we didn't award any blocks over 7 years for exploration? It's only after 2023, from 2023 to present, we would have awarded, I think, about 13 blocks. In addition to this, there was a lack of fiscal incentive. So from 2013 to 2017, we started allowing upstream companies to write off all of their capital allowances within 1 year. Prior to this, they could have written it off over 5 years, but of course, companies prefer monies up front because of the time value of money principle. Value of money tends to go down with time, so it's better to write it off in 1 year as opposed to 5 years. But this incentive was discontinued after 2017, and since no new incentives were put in place for exploration thereafter, exploration certainly would have slowed. And some fields, of course, underperformed. And then we also already exploited much of the easy to access gas, because most of the fields in the shallow water, which is less risky and less costly to monetize, have already been exploited. Now, this year we started monetizing gas from Mento and SIP, the Mento and SIP fields, and that brought production up very marginally to about 2.7 billion standard cubic feet per day. But in order to meet our demands for Atlantic LNG, to meet the demands of the petrochemical plants in Point Lisas and also for electricity generation, we actually need at least 3.5 billion scuffs of gas per day. It used to be around 4 billion scuffs, but that was before Train 1 was shut down. So right now we're about 800 million standard cubic feet of gas short of where we really ought to be. Now in 2027, the Manatee field is likely to come online, providing about 600 million standard cubic feet of gas per day at peak production. And we also expect 2 other fields to deliver gas in 2027, Ginger and Coconut. Now, these will give some improvement to our production levels, but is not going to return us to levels that we would have seen back in 2013, 2014. What is also important, what will allow us to pivot, is that we reach a final investment decision on the Calypso field. We're sitting on about 3.5 trillion scuffs of gas in the Calypso field, but we've not reached final investment decision given that this is deep water, and therefore it has a lot of operational and technical risk. Plus, it's very costly to monetize. So it's important that we get a fiscal package where the taxes, the royalties, cost recovery details, the risk sharing, field unitization, etc. They must all line up to ensure that the project becomes bankable. I was actually hoping to hear the Minister of Energy speak during the budget debate to hear if any decisions have been reached on Calypso. That did not materialize in the budget debate. It ended quite abruptly. So hopefully we can, in the coming weeks, we might get some information about the Calypso field from the authorities. Now, given that production levels still are not ideal, in order to raise revenues, the state appears to be using somewhat novel, somewhat diversified approaches instead of relying on the conventional things like increasing corporate or income taxes, like increasing VAT, etc. Because doing this could otherwise distort economic activities and even social stability. So one of the ways that they're looking to raise revenue in a more innovative fashion that we've not seen locally done by the state is through a real estate investment trust. What it does is a market-based way to unlock the value of its high-end property, things like land, office buildings, commercial spaces, hotels, industrial properties, HDC properties as well. These properties, some of them can be transferred into a professionally managed special purpose vehicle, a specially managed investment vehicle known as a real estate investment trust or REIT, right? And is run the same, it's supposed to be run by the same standards as any private sector fund. Now, both individual investors and institutions would then be able to buy shares in this REIT. And the money raised from selling these shares will then provide the government with much needed fiscal space that they can use this revenue to meet some of their spending needs without having to go and borrow and add to the public debt. And once the REIT is up and running, the properties inside it, whether it's retail, whether it's office space, retail, hotels, HEC properties, etc., all of these properties will still continue to earn income, whether it's income through leases or rentals, etc. And that income is pooled and then paid out to shareholders as regular dividends. So investors will get an income stream in the form of dividends, and also the state, if they choose to remain a majority shareholder or a shareholder, they will continue to receive revenues also in the form of dividends. So they're earning revenues from the initial sale of shares in the REIT and also from the annual dividend payments. Plus, over time, the value of the shares will appreciate. So all the investors, some of them rather, would be able to sell some of these shares if they wanted to make some more money. The government might choose to sell some of their shares to raise more revenues in the future. But in the short term, I think this is a win-win situation, because what it does, it unlocks the wealth creating value of state-owned assets, state-owned properties, by creating a financial instrument that the public can invest in, that institutions can invest in. And it strengthens government revenues at the same time, giving an investment opportunity for citizens. It helps to deepen our local capital market as well, because it introduces a new class of investable securities, like that entities such as pension funds, entities like insurance companies, etc., that they can all participate in. In the past, we would have seen that despite our economic challenges, the country does have a healthy investment appetite. This would have showed when there was the FCB shares IPO, TTNGL shares, the two NIF offerings as well. All of them would have been oversubscribed. And the reason is that we don't have many options for people to invest in locally that pays attractive returns. And this is one of the reasons why, just one of the many reasons why investors who have the money to do it and the US to do it tend to invest abroad in order to take advantage of the diversified markets that exist in more developed centers like in New York, etc. They invest abroad to take advantage of that, because there are more assets that they can invest in that pay stable, higher returns. The REIT, however, is a local option, an income generating investment, that vehicle that should pay high returns, stable returns, backed by assets right here at home. So hopefully we could see at least this investment opportunity curbing a bit of the capital flight. Now, another policy that was introduced is an asset levy. That's meant to give the state a quick and predictable stream of revenues, because it's levied on, it's more like a tax on assets. It's a tax on assets. So it's less likely for asset values to swing compared to something like profits. And what is quite important to remember is that it doesn't distort economic activities, in that it doesn't squeeze the middle and lower middle income groups. Like what broad tax hikes like income or corporate taxes could do alternatively. I think the burden is small, it's uniform, and it's transparent. It falls on a sector that has been consistently and highly profitable. The charge is modest, is about 0.25%, but what it does is help to widen the tax net and diversify revenue sources. It ensures that entities like banks, insurers, which continue to post very strong profits and enjoy high liquidity, make fairer contributions. And these are financially strong institutions at the end of the day. So the levy is really meant to balance the load a bit more evenly across society. In addition, I don't think this is going to hurt the financial stability, the financial system or lending. We've actually seen it before. Back in 2018, there was an increase in the corporate tax for banks. It rose from 30 to 35%, but lending didn't fall. In fact, credit to businesses, loans to businesses increased by about nearly 5% that very year when it was introduced. And between 2018 and 2024, loans went up by almost 48%. The thing is, our banks are well capitalized. They have very high capital adequacy ratios that are far above the minimum 10%. required by regulation. So this levy is not going to threaten their stability or competitiveness. And to give an example, one of our larger banks, Republic Bank locally, this is just the local arm, they would have reported total assets of about 51.6 billion last year in value. And that means their levy works out to be approximately $129 million. Now, when you compare that to their 1.3 billion in after-tax profits, and also having a capital adequacy ratio of about 15.7%, this new levy is not going to cause them financial distress. But of course, at the end of the day, we know that banks, their main objective is to maximize shareholder wealth. So there's always a risk, a high risk, that they may try to pass on this levy, at least some of it, to consumers in the form of higher fees or loan rates. And that's exactly why this is the right moment for the government, the central bank, and the commercial banks to sit down together and to look very carefully and transparently at the fee structures and to ensure that we find a fairer balance that protects consumers while at the same time keeping our banking sector very strong and very competitive. Now, I want to get into an area in the budget that directly affects the shipping industry, which is dealing with the customs and the ports. Because certain parts of the budget aimed to ease the burdens of doing business. And one major obstacle they appear to be tackling is a delay in accessing imported cargo at our ports. Now, all of us know the struggle. Not enough customs staffing, customs officers with piles of paper-based declarations, poor scheduling and weeks to get assessor appointment or premises inspection appointment. These delays tend to drive up rent, demurrage, overtime cost, because when firstly, importers, when it comes to overtime, customs overtime, they have to pay, of course, they have to pay this overtime fee. And secondly, whenever they're opting for overtime, they also have to pay overtime to their staff, because when they have inspection at premises after 4 p.m., their staff has to be present, so they have to pay them overtime as well. So that drives up, that compounds their costs even further. Now, the budget, however, proposes to make it faster, simpler, and less costly to clear cargo by upgrading the Asicuda system and which is really taking us much closer to a smart port system, because many steps ought to be automated. As it stands, and as we can all appreciate, declarations can already be submitted digitally, but entries could only be processed when the cargo arrives in our territorial waters. But with the new system, hopefully, the consignee can process the cargo as soon as they obtain the bill of lading, and any agency issues arising ought to be resolved, or will be resolved while the cargo is en route. And that allows for a faster or even an immediate clearance once it arrives. But what is also noteworthy, the state is also enabling online digital payments of taxes, duties, container processing fees, etc., via a platform that is being launched by the National Payments and Innovations Company, what used to be the IFC. And this is not only going to be unique to customs, it's a unified platform that will collect payments for government services across various, or if not all, government ministries and agencies. And when this is rolled out, importers would not have to go wait in lines at the bank to get a manager's check to take to the port. Customs cashiers, as we know, they typically operate from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. But with the new platform, importers can make their payments 24 hours a day from the convenience of their homes or their businesses. These upgrades, according to the budget, should be implemented within 18 months and will have, and of course, are likely to have a lot of benefits. One main one is that shipments might be cleared quickly upon landing, which speeds up the port throughput. And this should translate into lower rent and demurrage fees, since goods spend less time idling under customs hold. And part of the upgrade also involves integrating Asicuda with the port community system, so there can be better scheduling of customs officers for inspections. And this should also help to reduce cargo dwell times at the port, easing things like warehouse congestion, improving the vessel turnaround time. Manufacturers, for example, if there are less delays at the port, they would have faster access to imported raw materials and equipment, so it allows them to meet their production schedules and fulfill orders on time, including the international orders. And this will help to enhance the manufacturer's competitiveness and boost, of course, boost supply chain efficiencies. Exporters will be able to dispatch shipments with fewer bureaucratic hurdles, and that helps them to meet overseas delivery schedules. Plus, there are advantages in terms of just in time. Their faster import clearance means that manufacturers can maintain leaner inventories, which reduces their inventory holding costs. And of course, there are benefits for the state in terms of revenue collection, because the upgraded system will help to make it harder to cheat the system, since everything is tracked in real time. And this will help customs, hopefully, to catch undervaluations, to cut down on fraud, leave an audit trail, and make it easier to collect duties and taxes quickly and accurately, which of course brings in more revenue. But of course, some bottlenecks could still arise, especially since the CES, especially at the CES or during premises inspections, if, for example, a lot of the cargo gets red lighted and congestion builds up. So that's why, at the same time, it's good to see that there's a plan in the budget to increase customs staffing, and which is a good move, and which could be also very useful during high peak seasons, busy seasons, like coming down to Christmas time when container traffic peaks. The budget also indicated that another ship-to-shore crane will be procured, which is an important step given that some of the existing port handling equipment in both ports is either due for servicing, which is very expensive, and some of them are also nearing the end of their economic life. In fact, new equipment ought to help boost productivity. So containers, for example, can be offloaded faster. There have been instances in the past, many times, when vessels have had to leave the port without fully unloading because of long wait times. And that would have forced shipping lines to reroute, to reschedule routes, or to bypass us altogether, because they need to meet their schedules at the Panama Canal. Now, looking ahead, I think the next big step, and I think Indira alluded to it as well at the end of her presentation, I think the next big step is entering into a public-private partnership with a foreign port operator in order to raise the capital to improve the equipment and the infrastructure at the port, and also to expand the port, and importantly, to dredge the port, because all of this is quite expensive, and all of this is likely to cost US dollars as well. A lot of it will cost US dollars as well. Now, since the gate, on a side note, the gates of India are very much open to us. Why not consider a partnership with some of their top port operators, like Adani Ports, for example? There's a lot of potential to transform the port, not only into a profit-making entity, but a forex earner. If we reattract more shipping lines to Port of Spain, with the expansion of the Panama Canal back in 2016, larger vessels began favoring ports with deeper harbors, with more modern equipment and faster turnaround times. So if we take a look at this table here, it shows the number of shipping vessels arriving at the three major ports in the region, three major ports: Kingston, Caucedo in Dominican Republic, and Port of Spain. And the table shows the number of vessel arrivals at the Kingston Freeport Terminal are over 3 times more than Port of Spain. Both Kingston and Caucedo improved their performance over time as well. The number of shipping vessels coming into the Kingston Freeport Terminal increased by 18% from 2019 to 2024. And Caucedo increased by about 6%, but we declined by 6%. Our container throughput is also far below that of our regional peers. Jamaica's is about 7 times higher than ours. They were able to attract more shipping lines because their infrastructure is a bit more modern, their equipment is newer, and their ports have much better handling capacity. Containers are offloaded faster because they've properly dredged their harbors. They can easily accommodate the large new Panamax and post-Panamax vessels coming from Asia. But in contrast, the port of Spain has not been adequately dredged, and that limits the size of ships that we can receive, and that continues to hold back our competitiveness as a serious regional hub. And the difference between those ports and the port of Spain is that Kingston and Caucedo are managed by private operators, and that made a world of difference in their efficiency and their competitiveness. So private management would have brought in capital, modern equipment, and even faster decision-making, which allowed them to run like true commercial enterprises. So I think going forward, if we can bring in private capital through some solid PPP model, we can help to even modernize the port better. to more modernize the port, expand our port, dredge it properly, upgrade the equipment, and make it ready to handle the larger new Panamax vessels that dominate global trade. And when we do, it's not just about efficiency. It will help us to earn a bigger slice of the regional shipping market. And it's also about earning that foreign exchange through higher port fees, for example, berthing charges and new services like warehousing and ship maintenance. Now, I think I'm out of time there, so I will just stop here for now. But of course, we can chat more during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arjun. It was a very informative presentation, definitely. I really appreciated the full context you gave in terms of the evolution of our economy. That was very insightful. And your piece on customs, and you were going into some great detail, and which I appreciated as well, and I know the membership would have, speaking about the customs focus and dealing with the expansion of ASICUDA, which has been going on for a long time. But we have not really been seeing the benefits that we should have from that. So, but for us, for me, just to add, there was talk about a port community system, which brings together all the major stakeholders and all the agencies within shipping and logistics to speed up the flow of transaction and make us more competitive. That has been going on for some time too, but it has not been implemented. So if it is in this budget, it's encouraging that it was identified, and going forward is something that they will focus on. So that is always good. You mentioned port development as well, and I'm sure a lot of people listening are probably right on the spot there. But while we speak port development and we speak public and private partnership in order to take this forward and do the development that is necessary, I'm sure a lot of folks are putting up their hand and saying, well, what about the labor? Because that is also a major stumbling block that we face in the industry. So we will see how it goes in the Q&A section if people raise it and so on. And just to add, persons are also encouraged to put your questions on the chat, identify yourself, post your question, and you can identify who on the panel you want to address the question, you want to direct the question to. And we will be tackling that in the Q&A section. But thank you very much, Dr. Arjun, for a very insightful presentation. Our third panelist coming to speak will be Mr. Troy Prasad, who is a maritime professional with over 24 years of experience in the industry, spanning activities such as planning, marketing, business development, project management, budgeting, operations, corporate governance, and communications. Since 2017, he serves as General Manager of Bridge Control Services Limited, a maritime transportation provider where he leads all functions and processes. His career is also marked with experience in port management and maritime policy formulation and implementation. In March 2025, Troy was also appointed the president of the Shipping Association of Trinidad and Tobago, where he now plays a key role in shaping industry policy, leading collaboration across membership, government, public and private sector stakeholders, while advocating for sustainable and competitive maritime development. He holds certifications in history, international relations, business administration, and operational maritime management, bringing a multidisciplinary treatment of challenges and opportunities facing the maritime and logistics industries. So, Troy, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Fellow panelists, attendees, good morning. So I do not have a presentation. I will speak on some of the points addressed by my previous two speakers and some of the points that arose earlier that the Shipping Association of Trinidad and Tobago would have presented at a pre-budget seminar that we attended, as well as our contributions towards the budget a couple months ago. So how we see it is that a national budget is an annual plan that provides the necessary resources, financial resources, by the government to execute its medium-term plan. Now, its medium-term plan is, the government's medium-term plan actually is its manifesto for 2025. That's their official government medium-term policy. And that would have underpinned the budget that was presented last week, Monday. So I did some homework yesterday and I read the budget statement. I looked at some of the comments made by these professional services firms, etc. And I just wanted to share with attendees the perspectives of the Shipping Association as it relates to the budget. Now, the Shipping Association is a representative of approximately 85 members that operate within the shipping and maritime industry. So we represent shipping agents, the ports, the major ports, as well as marine service providers, ship owners, boat owners, surveyors, etc. So it's quite, we represent a major part of the supply chain, inclusive of the intermediary services like the freight forwarders, custom brokers, non-vessel operating common carriers, etc. So we represent a large part of the supply chain. And so every year, the members and the association look forward to hear what is being presented in the national budget, because it's a signal for projected activity. So, the shipping and maritime industry, the underpinning principle is that more than 80% of international trade is carried by seaboard transportation. And seaboard transportation, our members are involved in that. So we look forward to the national budget, and we look forward to hear what are the plans that will boost activity in the economy. In reading the budget statement, I didn't see any details on the public sector investment plan. Again, that is one of the signals for my members. That's a signal of activity in the economy that my members will look forward to. In terms of, it would signal the projects, infrastructural projects being undertaken in the economy, which will obviously improve volume of activity for trade and transportation of, project equipment, etc. So as Dr. Sajuan said, the devil is in the details. So we will continue to look and look into what the public sector investment program, presents. But when you look at the manifesto, which is the official government medium-term plan, one of the things that was identified was new revenue generating industries. And one of the areas in particular that was focused upon is the yachting and maritime hub development, in developing Chaguaramas as a premier yachting and boat building hub. So this is mainly in the pleasure side of it, recreation. However, we were heartened to see some focus on that as a point of strategic diversification. So having looked at that and then looking at the budget statement, we basically compare and contrast what was presented in the budget as it relates to the execution of the statements made in the manifesto. And I had a view out, but before I go into what was delivered in the budget, one of the major things that we have to look at is what the budget is underpinned. And those are the minister would have identified 5 pillars that underpin the budget. And I would just make mention of two of the pillars, again, that will be of interest to my membership and to shipping and maritime interests. And that was the third pillar, commercializing and optimizing public assets. And the fourth pillar, modernizing infrastructure, transportation, and digital services. So I particularly honed in on those two pillars to see what is being offered to the company. And Dr. Arjun would have mentioned some of the things here in the budget statement that we heard delivered by the minister. Now, it's all about 66 words in the budget statement that focused on two items: supporting ports and maritime development. And this is what was, I'm quoting, the Port Authority will procure a third ship-to-shore crane and refurbish the CARICOM wharf to boost regional trade. Removal of shipwrecks in Chaguaramas, Claxton Bay, San Fernando will improve navigation and safety. That's great. So, continuation with improvement of the navigation and safety, maneuvering in our harbors and, channels, etc. And then the other point was facilitating trade and investment. Trinidad and Tobago's marine sector will be repositioned as a Southern Caribbean yachting and marine service hub. Simplified immigration and customs procedures, digital clearance, and PPP-driven mariners and super yacht facilities will expand tourism and investment. So that's great. That's the major 2 points made in the budget statement. And what I think that we should focus on, so mention was made to a PPP-driven marina and super yacht facility. That's fine. And I think from our perspective, we have been hearing about the public-private partnership approach for improving infrastructure, equipment, etc., and attracting private investment in the port of Port of Spain. So I didn't hear anything in particular about that project as it relates to Port of Spain, but I'm heartened to see that the PPP approach is being adopted. However, this in the budget, it's more focused on mariners and the super yachts facilities. So what we would have liked to hear further from the national budget statement was, in particular, the projects associated with the major multipurpose port in Trinidad and Tobago. That's the Port Authority and the Port of Spain. So we would have preferred to hear some further details on that. But again, we await further pronouncements when the other ministers present on their particular areas. However, we were very happy to see the amount of time spent on the strengthening of the Customs and Excise Division. We have been advocating, a lot of time in the association is advocating with regards to the strengthening of the Customs and Excise Divisions and their relevant processes and standard operating procedures, etc. So we are happy to see the amount of the statements made with regards to the modernization of the Customs and Excise Division. What we observe is that there is the political pendulum swing every 10 years, with regards to the revenue authority. It swings in that direction, and then it swings back to no revenue authority. But either way, from an operator perspective, what we want is an efficient and productive Customs and Excise Division. Whatever the corporate structure at this point in time, that's fine. All we want is productive and efficient service. So we are happy that the government would have identified a lot of time. They identified the outdated legislation, the outdated ICT systems, the infrastructure, the understaffing, and the limited equipment capacity. And as Dr. Arjun would have gone into details on some of the modernization initiatives with regards to filling vacancies, promotion, reassignments, mentorship, training, the ASICUDA upgrades, which I think it's an 18-month project. Also, mention was made to electronics payments by the end of 2025. That will be definitely a point of satisfaction for the membership. So what we look forward to is the execution and the implementation to get these modernization initiatives executed and becoming effective. We have lobbied and advocated in particular for as well the implementation of the port community system, because we see the system as an important integrator of the all components in the supply chain, that is the TT BizLink, the ASICUDA, as well as the terminal operating systems of the respective ports. So we obviously, Shipping Association is a member of the implementation team, which is under the Ministry of Trade. And I'm also happy I saw correspondence yesterday coming to the office of the Shipping Association, inviting us to, the ministry inviting us to a meeting with regards to the continuing of the project. So I'm very happy that the project is back on. We haven't heard much about it over the past 6 months, but we met with the Minister of Trade back at about 2-3 months ago, and he committed to the project, and we have seen that correspondence to restart that project. So we are happy about that. Also, we have also advocated for our members would have invested in non-intrusive scanning equipment for use at their transit sheds. So our transit shed operator members have invested or are investing in such equipment, which will obviously improve the security at the transit sheds. So we would have advocated for 150% tax rebate for entities that would have acquired the scanning equipment. And this would have been to attract that, such investments in that equipment. And the major thing that we always propose is that, yes, we will support, border security. However, we want a good balance between border security and trade facilitation. That's one of the main advocacy points that we always promote. And finally, again, jumping off Dr. Arjun's latter points in his presentation regarding the ports. So again, we also make general statements with regards to continuous investments in port infrastructure, equipment, processes, technology, to achieve the optimal levels of productivity at our 2 major ports, both being members of the association, and we are there to support and continue to lobby if there's any requirements on their behalf that is required in our advocacy to the decision makers in the government, etc. So in summary, we see the national budget as a signal for investment and activity in the economy that we all look forward to. With regards to my membership, will all look forward to. We want activity. We want to be, to participate in that activity and earn, and operate and earn. So that is our focus, and I would leave it at that at this point, Mr. Moderator. Thank you. I think I made up time there for you.
Thank you very much, Troy, for a very detailed drill down into the concerns of the membership and the industry as a whole. Very insightful, and I think you captured most of the things that were pressing to the membership and some of the wider issues we are looking at in the industry. Moving on to our next speaker, we have panelist Mr. Mariano Brown. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the University of the West Indies, UWI, Arthur Lugjack Global School of Business. His professional life has been spent managing financial services firms in the Caribbean. Between 2007 and 2010, he served as a senator in the upper house of Trinidad. He held 2 cabinet portfolios, Minister of Trade and Industry and Minister in the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Brown hosts a bi-weekly radio program and writes a weekly newspaper column on topical business and economic matters in Trinidad and Tobago and across the region. So thank you very much. Mr. Brown, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much to the other panelists for doing much of the job. So I don't really have too much, a heck of a lot to say. My task was really to look at the whole business of international trade. And I just put together a couple slides to put a couple things in position in retrospect. And I think I can address some of the comments which were made previously. So if I could just share my screen. Right. I think I have to ask permission to share my screen, and I'm not seeing it.
Tech support, are you on the job?
Oh, I got it. Right. Well, this more or less sums up the position. And I guess as a shipping association, we're more interested in what we will call visible trade. And that's one of the reasons why I focused on it. The source of the data is World Integrated Trade Solutions. It's in US dollars. The reason why, because they common size it to STS, standard STIC codes, and we use 9 STIC codes. So rather than use the Trinidad and Tobago data, and to allow it for a basis of comparison, I use the integrated trade solution data because I thought it was more helpful. It only carries me up to 2024, to the end of 2024. There's no 2025 data available. I mean, if there's one number that I could probably highlight, which is not included in the chart, is our exports of ammonia, in particular as a bellwether in terms of what our current position is from a trade perspective and from a foreign exchange perspective and from a GDP perspective. And it is this. In 2022, our total exports of ammonia amounted to approximately $3.1 billion US dollars. Ammonia I use because we're the largest exporter of ammonia in the world now. Before it was Russia. We are not the largest producer, merely the largest exporter. By definition, both China and the US and Russia outstrip us in the absolute production of ammonia. But because we are export driven, the export of ammonia is basically one of our major export items. It's important to feature on that particular item. And our history over the last 3 years is as follows. We exported approximately $3.1 billion worth of ammonia in 2022. In 2023, the value of those exports fell to 1.8, and in 2024, 1.8 billion US, and in 2024, it fell to 1.5. Is that because the volume of ammonia exported declined? No. All that happened was the price. And if you look at this particular graph, if you look at this graph in particular, this tells you a little bit in terms of why our GDP has suffered. All right. Between the period 2010, which is where we're starting, to 2014, and this is the red line, this is the value of our exports, up and down, but largely associated with increase in prices, not necessarily in value. In fact, the underlying difficulty at the time was that the volume of natural gas being produced had started to go into decline. From a high of 4.2 billion, somewhere about 2010, it has continuously declined to where we are now, notwithstanding the generous fiscal provisions which made us literally the drilling capital of the world between 2015 and 2016. And the sunset provisions, in other words, those provisions were meant to disappear. It was not meant to last long because by definition, you were giving away tax income. And that tax income affected the revenue generation capacity of the Trinidad and Tobago government considerably. That's why in the period 2015 to the period 2018, there was a sharp decline in terms of the revenue which was available to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And that decline literally has continued up and down, not consistent, but suffice it to say, with the continued decline in natural gas production, there was a decline in terms of the absolute revenue available to the government and also the size of GDP. So the red line is a bellwether. It tells us how well we're doing, literally because you have to export to survive. Exports are the key generator of your foreign exchange and exports of services and or exports of visibles. Dr. Sajiwan was making the point that yachting provides a valuable source of income, provided that we do it well. And what the chart shows is that overall, the long-term trend, the red line, is downward. We'll not and have not seen the peaks that we saw in 2011 and 2014. They have not recurred. And the peak that occurred in 2022 was largely associated with the price of ammonia and the price of natural gas. Those spiked. And that's why we have the sharp spike in exports, right? But it declines rapidly thereafter. What you should also notice from the blue line is our visible imports of stuff. And what it indicates is that the imports trended upwards as the economy was growing, then imports rose. And then as we went into decline somewhere around 2014, 2015, that blue line also started to go down. So the demand for foreign exchange as well as the capacity to import was reduced because our income fell. And there was a spike in 2020, 2023, which is represented by the blue line, but still a downward trend. So overall, import demand has been declining, as well as our exports have been declining by the same amount. Now, when we look at the import composition, and this is critical, I mean, a lot of noise has been made with respect to where the foreign exchange has been going. The critical point is, and I put it here in percentage because in a component graph, it didn't come out so good. Right now, mineral fuels, lubricants, and related materials have by definition averaged approximately 30% of our imports. Well, because we were buying fuel to run Petrotrin. And when we weren't buying fuel to run Petrotrin, we were buying processed product. So even though the demand for fuels has declined from a high of 39% in 2011 and 42, and why would it have gone to those high figures? Well, because the price of oil on the international market was high. And therefore, if we imported the same amount, then the average value of the imports rose. Now, we have some aberration in the numbers from this data with respect to 2020 and 2021, right? 2021-22, where we should be going down to a very narrow figure. I can't explain that, but I will say that 2023 and 2024 are more or less in line with the previous numbers. We're still importing more than we import oil, more than we import food. And that's the most important import by value and also by volume. Because quite frankly, you can't run an economy without energy. And if we want to know one of the reasons why the German economy has been in trouble, very simply, they have had to pay more for their energy imports because they've moved away from Russia and therefore has been paying more for natural gas and other fuels. Now, that's a simple fact, right? So the same situation is due, we have to consider with regard to Trinidad and Tobago. Yes, we do use natural gas to generate energy, So that should make it a lot cheaper. But there's argument, of course, at the price at which the natural gas is sold to TNTech. So that's a story by itself, and that is to some extent modified by the budget insofar as it puts a surcharge on what you will call industrial consumers, who by definition will pay more. What that is a transfer of resources, literally, to reduce government subsidy to TNTech. But we have not solved the problem. That problem won't be solved until we deal with the issue of electricity rates across all segments of the economy. And even adjusting it in that way in the short run does not give a big dent in the problem. So I'll leave that for the time being. Now, the import number is also important if you look at the zero line, food and live animals, which is where the majority is. Now, I wouldn't say the second highest category of imports. In fact, the second highest category of imports is manufactured goods. Right? And machinery and equipment put together, they account for approximately 40%. So food is, by definition, as a percentage of the total level of exports, trending somewhere to between an average about 11, about 12%. Right? So that the real use of foreign exchange is machinery, transportation, and equipment, which of course would include cars and other rolling stock, as well as equipment which will be used in our heavy industries. Replacement parts are required. So in terms of focus, if we had to focus in terms of where we have to manage, there's some things that we will still need to import or must import. By definition, the economy has to run. It has to have equipment. And if you're in the business of heavy industry, which is where we are with regard to the chemical sector, then by definition, it will require replacements. So one has to consider that in terms of the foreign exchange variable. Now, also to be considered, by definition, is, and we talked about it from one of the aspects of the budget in terms of export diversification, in terms of exporting, and if you want, import substitution by producing more food. Now, that is a significant number. The average number over the last 3 years for food imports is somewhere about $1.3 billion US. Right? So that to take 25% of that, well, you know what you have to do. And at the moment, it's a very small percentage, so it requires a big effort to make those changes. Now, the question would be from the budgeted perspective, as distinct from the statements, have we put the type of resources necessary to make that type of transition? Now, the short answer to that is no. As much as the budget is lofty in terms of its ambition with regard to diversification, particularly with regard to food, it hasn't put the kind of budgetary numbers behind it. And there are a huge set of infrastructural factors that we haven't addressed. And I'm going to address some of the points that were made by Dr. Arjun as well, with respect to the expansion of the port. So when we look at, on the other side, in terms of major categories of export, that heavy green line is really what you would call fuels, and the blue line is your chemicals. Now, the fuels is liquefied natural gas plus oil. And the petrochemicals and the value of the petrochemicals spikes in 2022 and 2023, and that has to do with the price effect. So we know where we are with that and what has happened. And looking at the two larger numbers, the other graph with the line graphs, we know that the overall trend with regard to the volume of exports has declined, and that's largely related to our productive capacity in the, if not the energy sector, in terms of our production of natural gas. Now, in terms of component percentages, right, this is our I just used 3 major exports, which account for, between them, roughly just about between 90 and 80% of our total volume of exports. And they are what we will call, the green line is what we will call manufacturing. Now, the definition of manufacturing that we are using includes petrochemicals. The definition of manufacturing that is used by this STIC codes is actually manufactured goods. And I think you're dealing with harder stuff as distinct from the export of petrochemicals. That's captured by the red line, which is chemicals. And the blue line is mineral fuels, which is natural gas. So that tells you a little bit about the composition of our export and what diversification means in terms of changing that. literally you're dealing with 80% of the value of your exports come from literally to one area, really, quite frankly, one area, which is the production of natural gas. So that tells you the volume of effort which is required to change that. So I take the point that is made by Dr. Sajiwan. If we make some effort and we still move some level of diversification away towards that, and changing the structure of the economy, that is important. The difficulty is that we are a small economy. When we look at, again, looking at the STIC codes, and I asked it to tell me how many products Trinidad and Tobago exported, the answer was 1,700, which is not small. 1,700 means that there is a diversification in the production base, but the value of those products, by definition, it means that the majority of them are weighted towards 4 or 5 products. More than 80%, 90% is 4 or 5 products, and the rest, right, makes up the other 1,695 products. So diversification effort in terms of fixing those 1,600 products, it requires a lot of effort. Now, included in the budget speech is a commentary with regard to improving our infrastructure. And you all are in the shipping industry, so you all know it better. When we first conceptualized, and I would be part of the team that would have conceptualized the movement towards modernization in terms of IT for the port in particular, and what we call Trinidad and Tobago BizLink, everything that is now included in the budget speech is what was conceptualized then. One of the difficulties was getting the different agencies of government to come around to the same level of thinking. In fact, even though I was minister in the Ministry of Finance and part of the finance team, Customs and Excise was hugely at variance with what we wanted to do at the Ministry of Trade. It took some time to settle that, and I think eventually that was settled between Minister Huai and Vasant Bharat, who were both, well, Vasant was both the same hats that I wore, and they were able to sort it out with customs. Now, ASICUDA has been around a long time. What we're really talking about is simply an upgrade to ASICUDA. All right, so we've been using ASICUDA, our basic system, for more than 20 years. So this is not news, and we just simply, according to what is in the budget speech and what is being said here, is being doubted as a major reform. It isn't. It's the sort of normal system upgrades that you have to do in IT every year when systems change. The reality is that we have never made the sort of infrastructural changes, and we've never been willing to make the changes which have been required to tie in the IT required for the trade settlement system. Now, this is not because we didn't have good advisors. This isn't because we didn't, we spent our money badly. In fact, the people whom we hired are known as Crimson Logic. Crimson Logic is featured by Harvard Business Review at least 5 times. And they are the company that built Singapore as a port and container throughput. And of the 3 top countries, the 3 top ports in the world for container volume movement will be Port of Shanghai, Port of Singapore, and 2 other Japanese ports. What basically links those ports is that the systems that they all use were all designed by Crimson Logic. So we're not lacking in terms of, how shall we call it, ideation. The issue is implementation. Let's get that clear. That's a fundamental issue. And notwithstanding any of the changes in policy or statements that have been made by the incoming government, the reality is that getting those things implemented has been problematical throughout the entire course of whichever government has been positioned over the course of the last 15 years. Point 1. Point 2, in both Caicedo as well as in Jamaica, they have actually spent some money in terms of developing their port for transshipment. So their volume numbers are completely different to ours. Our ports have been largely associated with shipments into Trinidad and Tobago, not with regard to transshipment. And that's one of the reasons for the differences in volume. But you are members of the Shipping Association, so I don't need to tell you that. I'm sure you know it. The other significant difficulty is that the geography is very difficult to deal with. And the 2 major ports of Trinidad, which deal with visible goods, are the Plibdeco Point Lisa port, which was built to facilitate the energy sector companies, the petrochemical companies in particular, and Port of Spain Port. Now, Port of Spain, I think, has its largest berth or its deepest berth at depth of 9 meters, if I'm not mistaken. One of the difficulties with dredging the channels to any depth greater than 9 meters is that the infrastructure wouldn't support it. If you went down below that and you dredge the port, then by definition, you have to build an entire new, you have to build a new port, literally. And the difficulty is those channels are fed by the Caroni River, which silts up, as well as by the Caroni River, which also comes from Venezuela, which also helps silts up our channel. The natural port of Port of Spain is in fact Chaguaramas, where it is the deepest. Now, facilitating the development of another port in that particular area, given the configuration, will of course be a significant undertaking at this time, not including the difficulties with regard to adjusting a highway. As anybody who travels on that route knows, if one car breaks down, you have a 15-minute delay. And in fact, just in normal coming and going across that peninsula takes a good half an hour because it's 2 lanes, right? And there are no real parking spaces from a development perspective. So there's some substantial issues with regard to maritime and in particular port development and developing throughput. So whilst I am grateful and happy for the ideas which have been expressed, we have some issues, I think, with regard to the how, not what. I think we could all agree on the what fairly quickly. The issue is the how and whether we have some budgetary support. Now, a budget that, for example, makes announcements or make a significant announcements that it is going to give 10% to everybody but doesn't budget for it, does tell me I have a little problem with credibility. And that is my difficulty with the budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, for your contribution. I must say your isolation of the issues into specifically trade, it was very insightful and eye-opening. Seeing some of those numbers and the effect it has on government revenue is really, lend a lot to our discussion here that we would have. Just for, in terms of the technical side of things, when you spoke of transshipment, Trinidad, our transshipment is by no means, you're right, like Caucedo and Kingston, they are developed specifically for that. But our in Trinidad transshipment represents probably about 40%, or probably 35 to 40%, which is still a significant proportion. Port of Spain, I know they would do, their volume is like about 40% transshipment, and Plipdeco more like 25% of their volume is transshipment. So it's still significant. It's not an ignorable sort of figure, but definitely not any close to the Caucedo and Kingston numbers. But thank you very much for your contribution. Well appreciated. Moving on to our fifth and final panelist, we have Mr. Bevan Narayan Singh. Bevan is a seasoned legal and regulatory professional with over 25 years of experience in competition policy, corporate law, international trade, and project management. He has served as Executive Director of the Fair Trade Commission of Trinidad and Tobago since 2014, leading the agency's strategic and operational mandate in promoting fair and transparent markets. Prior to this appointment, he held the position of Senior Legal Officer at the CARICOM Secretariat, where he was responsible for a broad range of legal and policy areas. Mr. Narayan Singh holds a LLB from the University of the West Indies, an LLM in Corporate and Commercial Law from London School of Economics, and an LLM in International Trade from the University of Arizona, and a Master's in Public Administration from Harvard University. He is also a certified project management professional and is a graduate from the University of Oxford Business School Executive Leadership Program. In addition to his role at the Commission, Mr. Narayan Singh has been actively engaged in academia and public service. He has served as a university lecturer and tutor, and as member of several boards and committees, both locally and regionally. He is also actively involved in motivational speaking and public education, where he shares insights on leadership, resilience, and societal impact. In recognition of his achievement and service, Mr. Narayan Singh was honored by the University of the West Indies as one of its distinguished alumni during the institution's 75th anniversary celebrations. So, Bevan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hayden. You should have added that we've been friends since teenagers, but
Yes.
I've also known Troy for a good while as well too.
Yeah.
I would want to before I start, I want to thank everyone for the my fellow panelists for the detailed discussions. You have really made it very, as Mr. Brown had indicated as well when he presented, it made it kind of easy for me because I would not delve too deep into things that were discussed, because I think it's very important that we have the Q&A session. But again, thank you very much to Michelle, Hayden, and Troy for the opportunity to present. So I'll be sharing my screen now, and let me see. Right, I'm sharing it, and I will do now slideshow. So slideshow from the beginning. So everyone is seeing it, right? Okay, so I think we can start. Yeah, so my presentation is really focused on the way forward. And this is why the theme, I think, is very important. The opportunities for engagement and economic growth. And why I think I'm a good person to speak about this is because I've been experiencing it in my day-to-day activity particularly since April 28th, where the Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Trade, Investment and Tourism, which is now the line ministry for the Fair Trading Commission, where we have had to, to adjust our work, do our work in accordance with what has been the mandate and what is now government policy in respect to the way forward. So, as an introduction, I just want to reiterate what, your last president, Ms. Sonja, would have indicated. The industry really is still an important industry as it relates to, the way, in terms of the connectivity, in terms of economic stability in Trinidad and Tobago. That has been reiterated by Troy, and all panelists, I think, have emphasized that. And I think we always need to recognize the importance of the industry. And I think that your various governments and other stakeholders do recognize that, but I think you need to reinforce that at all times. In terms of the budget, Troy would have mentioned the two areas. I would have also highlighted those in terms of pillars, in terms of what you can build on, the commercializing and optimizing public assets, but also more specifically modernizing infrastructure, transport, and digital services. Now, the presentation did not, in my view, speak specifically with respect to the shipping sector in detail about that, but I think it's very important to know that when you're modernizing infrastructure and transport and digital services, there is room for collaboration with the shipping sector and ways in which that could contribute to the development goals, the positive development goals that were set out, and which were also emphasized was the need for collaboration and resilience. In terms of the themes, that again was I think stressed as well. But I think it's very important to emphasize the emphasis on fairness and cutting costs for everyday citizens, and that is where you see a lot of the fiscal measures that are going to be put in place, and recognize where this industry is at in terms of where it moves forward. So in terms of the agenda, well, I already mentioned some of the focus areas, but also some of the fiscal measures, other measures as well as the legislative changes. I think it's very important that the industry is aware of certain pieces of legislation that will be coming in and that is proposed, and that is a way to chart the course forward and in terms of collaboration, in terms of feedback as well too. I'll also speak about some of challenges and opportunities, as well as what I recommend things you can do going forward, as well as a conclusion. So in terms of the focus areas, in terms of fairness, well, the taxes on banks and landlords, well, I think Valmiki would have emphasized that it's really a question of fairness. These entities have been, in fact, making record profits. So it's I guess time to share the wealth, so to speak, in terms of in terms of ensuring that there's increase payments for how Trinidad and Tobago has been good to them. But there's also been a lot of relief as well to the everyday citizens as well too. There's VAT removal on certain items. We also know the decrease in price of super gasoline as well. But there's also an emphasis on diversification. Now, Indira would have gone into a lot of detail with that, so I would not want to speak too much about it. But what I would say is that there's an emphasis on agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, and services, the services industry. Now, we know that the budget based on previous budgets, this was a relatively short budget in terms of the length of time to read it. It was read. So what it also shows to me is that, and Troy had mentioned that as well, that is very important when the ministers have to speak on these issues in terms of their plans, particularly the Minister of Agriculture, with respect to what he has in mind and what the government has in mind with that sector, as well as the Minister of Trade, Investment, and Tourism, where he would speak about the work that has started and the work that he is focused on continuing. What is also very important, Dr. Arjun did mention how the budget debate in Parliament was ended somewhat abruptly. That will not be the case, obviously, in the Senate, because and importantly, the ministers with responsibilities for those sectors sit in the Senate, Minister Ratiram and Minister Maraj. So you will get a better idea of their plans and what they have been doing in the last 5 months, and you can see where your sector could benefit and the opportunities that are there. In particular, there's some work with respect to the tourism aspect and accelerating digital transformation. In fact, I'm a member in the ministry of a cross-functional team where there have been certain focus areas on that medical tourism as in particular. And this is something that you will hear more about when the minister speaks in the Senate. The idea is, of course, to generate employment, increase foreign exchange, and that the plans are in train for that. And there's also going to be some tax reform with respect to VAT, income tax, and national insurance. So in terms of the key fiscal measures, well, I would have mentioned the positive aspects and potentially negative. Now, that again would have been mentioned before. These would be some reliefs that you would see in legislation. The lowering of the gas, the amendments to foreign use vehicle. It will be now you can import older vehicles. There's also some tax reliefs and as well as incentives. Now, the details of these incentives would be better spelled out as time goes on, but there are going to be a lot of incentives to promote these sectors. These sectors have been identified for sustainable economic development, and you will see that as well as, well, we did mention the situation with the Asikuda. Now, as I said, they are potentially negative. One has that there would be potentially increased costs of doing business because of some levies and things like that, and certain taxes with respect to alcohol, tobacco, and on the high-end vehicles and things like that. But that doesn't mean that the full effect would be passed on. And that is where, as Minister Tanko had indicated, and Dr. Arjun, that these, for instance, with the increase of the levies and the assets, it's a relatively small increase. There have been increases in corporate taxes in, I believe it was 2018, and it did not necessarily mean an increase in, for instance, interest rates. Interest rates are relatively low right now. So there is a way that some of this could be absorbed in a positive way, and where the everyday consumer, the everyday citizen, is not too adversely affected. And we have to also mention, in terms of the increase of the NIS payments, it was, of course, a long-term decision because the program, the system as it is, was not sustainable, and so there is now a possible way for this in the long term to be sustained, and that is why you have to probably have this increase now in the payments. In terms of legislation, Well, you would be seeing what was going on there. The bill that Minister Tanku would have, in terms of the budget debate, was the appropriation financial year 2026 bill 2025. So that is what is being debated now. We are now at the Standing Finance Committee, where if people have time, I think it's very interesting to look at it. Sometimes it's a lot of theatrics, but it does show transparency, and I must praise both the opposition and the government for setting out how the various allocations are going to be spent, and the deep down drilling that the opposition has been doing. There's also going to be subsequently a finance bill, where some of the what I mentioned before will be reflected in legislation, such as the increases in the duties on alcohol and things like that, the National Insurance Act. All of that will come out in an umbrella piece of legislation in the finance bill, where there will be a number of amendments. Now, I mentioned those, but what would be coming, at least in this year's legislative agenda, would be other pieces of legislation that speaks to the government's policy with respect to what they plan to implement. For instance, the upgrades to Asikuda would have to be reflected in certain amendments to the Customs Acts and regulations. There's also going to be there is talk. I don't know if it will happen in this fiscal year, but there will definitely be some deliberations. The minister did indicate that there is going to be a reform of VAT. So there could be a new sales tax, and that would be there would be possible drafting of legislation with respect to that. I also mentioned the Home Invasion Self-Defense Bill, because this is a very important piece of legislation that the government is focusing on as well in this coming year. And this is why it's important that stakeholders have a say on it, if you haven't had a say yet, and how that legislation is going to be put in place. There's also going to be further amendments to the Income Tax Act. Now, this was something that Minister had also mentioned, the need to reform the transfer pricing system. Now, we don't have time to go into very details of what transfer pricing is, but the fact of the matter is the idea is to widen the tax base so that to ensure that income that is earned in Trinidad and Tobago is properly taxed. And that's the idea. And this would mean amendments as well to that legislation. We did mention the Revenue Authority. That has been not officially repealed yet, but that is what is going to happen. It's already been approved in both houses. So we're just waiting proclamation now by the president. But why I mentioned those pieces of legislation, because this is time for the sector and the stakeholders to have input into how they wish how this legislation would roll out and the provisions to make sure that the interests of this of the sector is taken into consideration. Now, I must mention, I did a similar presentation to the association last year, and I mentioned a piece of legislation that was at the committee level, the shipping bill. And I've not heard anything about that, but I think that if indeed that legislation, if it comes into place, could positively help the shipping association and its members, I think this is something that you can advocate for as well too, to get that piece of legislation proclaimed and put into force. In terms of challenges, well, I don't want to belabor that, but it could be high operating costs. But again, it depends on the level of absorption that happens. There's always challenges with respect to regulatory compliance requirements. So there will be challenges, as in all budgets. It's not the first budget where there would have been taxes and potentially higher operating costs that could trickle down to the regular population. But also there's a lot of opportunities. And that's why I think that the theme of positivity and collaboration is very important, because certain things were mentioned by the minister, and his colleagues would probably go into more detail with respect to that in terms of the modernization, digital transformation, as well as growth in agro-processing and manufacturing and tourism. And you would see what is going to happen when, at least what are the intentions when the minister speaks. There's also, and this is something I want to delve into a little, the private sector organization of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, this is a organization that will be an important lobbying group. There are similar associations in Barbados and Jamaica, And I would urge members, whether it be as the association or in members' private capacity, to see how best you can join that. It's going to be a very wide type of in terms of membership, and that is something that is being rolled out. I think they were officially incorporated in law this week, if I'm not mistaken, but definitely in the rollout is going to be official in December. And this is something that I think that you all could play a major role in, because as a powerful lobbying group to get your to get certain policies in place where the government will be listening to some of the work that is going to be doing. There's also regional collaboration opportunities, and that would have been mentioned in terms of the rollout of certain trade agreements, and let's see how that goes. But again, it's opportunities for the sector. And again, the idea is to leverage opportunity so that you can continue to grow and enhance trade facilitation, investment promotion, and support. Because I think that is what has been the emphasis now for groups like you all, to help in respect to that and support the national economic agenda. So as a call to action, what I would say is that, and as was mentioned by Dr. Sachu, and this is the first budget of at least 4 more. And so the idea now is you need to work with what the government has in mind and what its plans are for economic development, particularly as it relates to economic diversification, trade facilitation, and fiscal stability measures. I was very impressed by the presentations by the previous panelists, and I would hope that they are a part of various efforts with the various councils that were mentioned, and even the private sector organization, Trinidad and Tobago, because I think the input of persons like these panelists would greatly assist in terms of having realistic policies and proper implementation. The idea is, of course, to align with the policies and modern your infrastructure and face these operational challenges positively. And in terms of strategic collaboration, what I would say, some of the areas I mentioned, 6 there, but I think the key, what you have to do is to really show what the government is trying to emphasize, that Trinidad and Tobago is indeed open for business, and there would be increased ease of doing business as well too. So you could identify again some of the problems. Mr. Brown would have identified some of the issues, and I guess again you have to reiterate it. Sometimes you think they know, but reiterate it again that some of these issues are happening. And the idea is that you are going to play a positive role in ensuring that there is sustained investment for growth and development, and particularly that Trinidad and Tobago is open for business, because investment and foreign investment is indeed a focus area. So how can you do that? I mentioned that you can support the efforts to build robust institutions and governance frameworks, whether at actual members or potential in terms of feedback. Again, I would mention participate in the private sector organization of Trinidad and Tobago's discussions and initiatives, particularly in areas like export logistics, e-commerce, and capacity building, because you need to be united as a private sector to help meaningfully shape policy and advance efforts that this government is trying to do, particularly in the area of national competitiveness. Again, provide input on legislative and regulatory reforms, urge the need for the shipping bills proclamation, collaborate where necessary, and try to, again, keep linking the sectors that were focused. Certain sectors that we remember, tourism, manufacturing, services, and agriculture, were targeted and focused on as ways for where the government would want to emphasize for sustainable economic development. Also, the plan to make Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean's Southern Caribbean's premier yachting and marine services hub. Again, see where your sector, your association can play a positive role in that respect. And again, customs broker, I don't know if it was established, but that has been an issue a little while ago. Again, urge for it to be reestablished, and that's where you need to advocate. So as I come to the end now, my last slide, the budget, as all budgets, not reinventing the wheel here, has challenges and opportunities. And one has to understand what was the primary focus. But again, the focus is, of course, for lasting prosperity with some short-term benefits as well to the most vulnerable, and ensuring also that there's access to opportunity, with Trinidad being a stronger, fairer, and more prosperous country. And you all are a critical enabler of this. You serve as a backbone for import-export activities and along the supply chain as well as regional connectivity. And that is very important to always remember. And you need to align yourselves with that because collaboration is important. And as I come to the end there, I would just like this statement. I wish I had made this statement, but I'm not so eloquent, by Rebecca Grinspan, who's the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development's Secretary General. She made that in her opening remarks at UNCTAD 16, which is now going on. The future is not something that happens to us. It is something that we build. And that shows the need to be positive and collaborative moving forward. And this sector needs to do that. It needs to, you can't stay, I know you don't do that, I would think, but it's still, you have to reinforce the need to move forward and build. And well, so my time has come to an end for my timer as well too. But again, I would like to thank everyone, my fellow panelists, as well as the Shipping Association and the moderator for the opportunity to speak briefly this morning. And if there are any questions, comments, or concerns that are addressed to me, I'm more than willing to give my 2 cents. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bevan, for sort of laying out for us the way forward, how we should take this into the budget and how best to go forward with it. You touched on some of the legislative imperatives, as well as the opportunities that are outlined for us. In particular, you spoke about collaboration, and this is the right opportunity for the Shipping Association to be to be the advocating body, sort of galvanizing some of the private sector within the industry so that we can be part of the collaboration to influence policy and be sort of one of the drivers behind the way forward for Trinidad and Tobago and the industry. So thank you very much for that. I will just like to reiterate, we have a Q&A chat. So you can post your questions there directed to any specific panelist or in general. Please use the Q&A icon so that you can do that. Before we go into that Q&A segment, I will ask each panelist to just give the 3 or 5 key takeaways from their presentation so that it is fresh in everyone's minds when we start to get into the questions. So we will start with Indira. Can you tell us, please, the 3 to 5 key takeaways you will want the persons within the webinar to take away from your presentation?
Sure, I'm trying to put my video on, but I'm not successful. Maybe the host needs to do that. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear?
I'm hearing you.
Okay, good. But I can't enable my video if the host needs to do that. Yes, so in terms of my presentation, I would say the key takeaways is that this is a budget. It's not a perfect budget, but I think it's a budget that provides a sense of hope and confidence in the economy. It's a budget that pivots the economy more and more away from the hydrocarbon sector towards a more balanced growth approach, looking at building out growth through a number of various sectors, while still very aggressively attempting to monetize what is left of the hydrocarbon industry. So that I think that is very important. I think collaboration is another thing that I want to leave in terms of this. What I have been hearing is that this particular government is very open to collaboration, and therefore herein lies the opportunity for the shipping industry to reach out to the relevant ministers and be able to be part of the discussion and part of the problem solving going forward. And then finally, implementation. This government has set a very robust and very ambitious agenda. with respect to economic diversification, and it really needs to get on the ball in terms of delivering. And even if all is not delivered, but they're on their way, I think we should be all right.
Thank you, Indira. Dr. Arjun, your key takeaways you will want people to leave with from your presentation.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry about that. So my presentation, first of all, focused on our energy dependence and the fiscal vulnerability because of this energy dependence, given that it's about 40% of our GDP, 80% of our exports. And the decline in gas production led the economy to decline by almost 17% since 2016. And of course, persistent deficits totaling about 79, almost 80 billion over the last decade. At the moment, we continue to have structural constraints in gas production because of mature fields, slow exploration, underperforming wells, the fiscal incentives not being where they used to be. We do have new fields coming on stream by 2027, Manatee, Ginger, Coconut, most notably Manatee, which will improve supply, but it will not necessarily take us back to peaks where we would have seen in the late 2000s and even 2013, 2012, 2013. The budget did give us some innovative means of, highlight some innovative means that they're going to attempt to use for raising financing, some innovative fiscal diversification tools like the Real Estate Investment Trust, a modest levy on the assets on banks. So it reflects a shift towards an incorporation of more predictable and non-distortionary revenue measures, one of which could help to deepen the domestic capital markets without burdening lower income groups, stifling private investments as well. I also spoke about what was in the budget, the upgrade of the Asikuda system. And what I'm looking forward to, something I've been calling for many years now, introducing that digital payments system throughout state agencies, allowing for payments to state agencies and by extension the state digitally to be done online. And also the last part is urgent, what I think is important, the need for enhancing the infrastructure at the Port of Port of Spain and also the Port of Point Lisas, the possibility of dredging the port as well, given that the Port of Port of Spain only currently handles the old Panamax vessels, not the new and post-Panamax vessels, which are dominating world trade right now. I think if Jamaica having looking at some information here, before they dredged sometime before 2015 or so, they were just at about 11 to 12 meters. After dredging, it brought them to about 15.5 meters. In fact, in the turning basin in that port, the Kingston Freeport Terminal would have gone to about 17 meters. So we need to seriously consider the possibility of dredging our port, enhancing the equipment and the infrastructure, etc., to bring it back into a more competitive state compared to Kingston and Cowcedo. Cowcedo is actually going to receive, I think this year, they signed an MOU to receive an investment of about $750 million US, also for port expansion. And Port Cowcedo is also a free zone, a free trade zone. So part of it is going to be used to enhance their free trade zone services as well.
Thank you, Dr. Arjun. Troy, there's the key points, the key takeaways from your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Hayden. Well, coming out of the national budget, what my members look forward to is activity. We want to see activity coming out, the investments being made into the economy that will allow for increase in trade, increase in E&P activities, which will redound to the benefit of the operators in the maritime industry, shipping and maritime industry. So basically what we want to see is activity. With regards to our role in advocating for all these things that would have identified by the previous speakers, we continue to actively advocate for the improvement of our industry in terms of efficiencies and productivities, etc., as well as the modernization of the customs, etc. So we continue to advocate for that. A lot is going on. Mention is made on that private sector organization of Trinidad and Tobago. We have been invited to be a part of that organization. So it's in the embryonic stages at this point in time, and the Shipping Association has been invited, and we are actively playing a role in the development of that organization. So that would also improve our ability to advocate at the higher levels, at the strategic levels, utilizing the arm of that private sector organization. So basically, that's what we're looking for. I just want to ensure that my members are able to operate efficiently and effectively, and there's activity in the economy for us to benefit from. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Troy. Mr. Brown, your synopsis of your presentation, key takeaways?
Well, very simply, I think that the other panelists made the point that the exports, Trinidad and Tobago export volume is dependent on a very small number of commodities. And there's a base there for diversification, but it requires a considerable amount of investment and effort and technical effort to make it happen. On the import side, the spread is much wider, but the real problem with foreign exchange and foreign exchange availability as determined by our exports is not predicated on the basis. The biggest single imports are those of equipment and energy fuels. Right? So if you look at those two things, the focus in terms of the foreign exchange really requires, and what has been announced, a much greater finessing, I think, than we've done so far. With respect to the diversification efforts, it's a tall order. Everything that has been said in terms of what is required in terms of port development and port modernization, I think we accept it. We think that this is the way we have to go. The difficulty is that implementation has always been too slow. And I'm not clear that we have the resources to be able to do what we say that we want to do. And my last point was, if Minister of Finance makes a major announcement, which is part and parcel of the whole budgetary requirements, and that is a 10% announcement, and doesn't provide for it in the budget, that undermines the credibility of the budget and his ability and or his willingness to make the changes that he said that he's going to do.
Thank you very much, sir. Bevan?
Yeah, hi.
Your synopsis of
Yeah,
your
well,
takeaway?
basically, I try to, as you know, the way forward, and based on a lot of the guidance from the other presentations that were done, I think there is a lot of opportunity. But again, you have to take this opportunity. It's not, and you have to dive down to see where you all are in this whole scheme of things. You wouldn't get specifically, unless it's something that directly relates to you guys. There's not going to be something that says, this is what we have in mind for the Shipping Association. This is what, but when you hear about the industries and the sectors that are being targeted, you have to find a way to see where you fit in with respect to that. There's also the key for collaboration, whether it be through the private sector or with the government as well too. That's the key. There is the need for increased collaboration. But lastly as well, and Mr. Brown would have identified that as well, there's a need for accountability as well too. So you eventually will have to call up persons, that you promise you're doing this, you're going to do this. Where is it? But again, you have to give some time, as we know as well too. But there needs to be an element of accountability as well too. But again, you have to be positive right now. But eventually, when in terms of where, if the sector is not being the interest of the sectors is not being taken into account as best as you wish it to be, bearing in mind, as I mentioned, the importance of the sector, the Troy would have mentioned how important the sector is as well too. Again, you need to reiterate that and have the powers that be to be accountable. So I think that is what would be my key takeaways briefly.
Thank you. And thank you very much, panelists. I mean, we really drove the conversation this morning, bringing some critical points to the forefront, a lot to consider. So we'll be going into our question and answer, Q&A segment right now. And just to say before I open it, everyone here is really someone giving an expert point of view on items within the budget or the budget as a whole. They are not necessarily the actual persons to get things implemented at the government level. So sometimes I know you will be eager to say, well, when is this going to be done, and place timelines? They may not be the ones to do such things. So we will go to the Q&A section, but bear that in mind, please. And I'm looking at a lot of anonymous questions. Some of them very, I will just read them out. They are not really questions, but more so statements. So I will just do that, and we could take it as constructive feedback and things to consider. Even for things to help the association build their position and their narrative as they try to collaborate with the government. The first one is, ASICUDA will only work if customs totally commit. Well, okay, we understand that. Captain Badaloo asked, when is there going to be an attempt to upgrade the Customs Act? Which is a valid point, and which has to be, I don't know if it is a precursor, but definitely a consideration for all the things that they are signaling that they are going to do within customs. We need to look at the Customs Act in totality. I don't know if anyone here could shed light into when it is going to be done, but it's certainly something to bear in mind, that really is the foundation of how customs operate. They operate under the Act of Government. There's a Customs Act. So, which will need to be addressed to forward anything major in the Customs and Excise Division.
Well, if I may, just as a legal person, with respect to amending the Customs Act, I think that would require significant amendments, and I don't know that we have the skill set in Trinidad and Tobago to properly reflect what is necessary to modernize. And when you have legislation like that, normally you probably hire like a consultant to do so, probably an international consultant. Normally from my experience I was in the ministry just before Mr. Brown became the minister. A lot of times you need to get foreign consultants to do the drafting this type of technical legislation. So if you have to do that, it's a long process, because amending the Customs Act is not 2 or 3 provisions to change and everything. It requires a significant type of amendments to modernize the system, and that will likely mean using a consultant. I know the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, has helped and assisted my organization with certain things, and that might be the way forward, because I don't think we have the technical skill set here to properly have with a modern Customs Act, at least to meet the needs of this sector and the key stakeholders.
With respect, all of the acts being contemplated by that budget speech, and those that have been in process have all been assisted by technical consultants. So I don't see that amending the Customs Act will be any different from anything that we're doing currently.
Okay, thank you, Bevan and Mr. Brown. I see.
Can I just weigh in on this really quickly?
Okay, sure.
Despite the automation, I mean, from what I have observed is that you see that when there's that human element that still exists, that can enhance or disrupt. So, and my presentation, I alluded to it a bit, that you could find that, for example, when you have an instance where a set of cargo that should be green lighted, right, or were green lighted by the system, end up the customs go into the system, or customs officer goes into the system, red light is set to them. So many importers have no choice but to go for customs over time. So at the end of the day, you have some officers that they sort of manipulate the system then to their own benefit. I think these are still possibilities that, not strong possibilities rather, that require significant customs reform at the end of the day.
Well, here's the issue with that, and I don't think it's not a question of reforming customs. You can't reform people. What you have to do is enforce rules. That's a fundamental issue. You have to enforce rules.
Yeah,
and if
absolutely.
if you're going to make those changes, and these changes the point I'm making is we're not talking about anything new or there's rocket science. It has been done elsewhere. That's what has been done in Shanghai. This was what's done in Singapore. That's been done in a whole set of other places. Those rules have already been designed. Right? The issue is implementation and getting agreement on the implementation to get it done. That's the point. Right? So the real devil here, in terms of the changes that we're talking about, is not that they're impossible to conceive. Right? It's the issue of putting the rules in position and enforcing them. Right? No, that's the key issue.
Mr. Moderator.
Yo.
Yes. So with regards to the customs, I have seen the Customs Act, and it is a very thick document. So you know how much what the Customs Act deals with, and the Customs Act and its regulations. Quite a thick document. And the amendment or the review of the act will take some time. As we know, the process for amending laws, you go through, you have to develop a policy document for the act or for the particular section or whatever, based on what you want to reform and amend. Then you have to go to the CPC, and then you go to the LRC and all these things. We as operators have been advocating for particular sections, amendments in particular sections, and we have taken it from the perspective of we go to the customs and we tell them that we advocate for standard operating procedures for the implementation of the act, because what we have seen is the various interpretations of the regulations and the implementation or the execution of the various pieces of legislation changed by the customs officers and the OCs at the relevant areas. So what we have been advocating for is really for the development of standard operating procedures, so that when they switch around the customs, the OCs and the customs officers at the locations, that they're reading from one playbook. So from the operators level, that is our concern there. Yes, the amendment of the act to modernize the Customs Act and its regulations is important. However, we operate we are operating as well. So we can't wait on the amendment, but we advocate for that standard operating procedure. How successful we have been in getting that standard operating procedure is another thing, but we continue to chip away at it and try to get that standardized and consistent interpretation of the laws. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Troy, Bevan, Mr. Brown, and Dr. June. Moving on to another question / statement, and I'm hoping it generates as much dialogue as the previous item on customs. And it's from Captain Roel Badaloo again. The biggest block for yachties in Chaguaramas is clearance. Are these procedures going paperless or being improved? I don't know if anyone here could...
I mean, that is the intention. In fact, even before the budget, I know there was a lot of consultation held between the Minister of Trade and the yachting industry, towards this. And that is why, in fact, in my presentation, I did allude to that. The whole idea is to have online clearance, to move from the 15 forms that they currently have to fill out to one harmonized form. Much in, I think it's CCLAIR, the CCLAIR system, much as is done in the other islands is the objective. I think there's also the objective of, because if you are pushing the yachting sector to become yachting and service center as it originally was, what happens is the yachts are coming here not just to stay here and sail it, they're actually coming here off the sailing season. They're coming here to spend 6 months during the hurricane season, which is when they live on their boats, they have the repairs done, etc. So ensuring, for example, that our dry docking facilities are upgraded significantly, something that we would need to focus on. Ensuring that we have marinas that have all of the kinds of facilities that they are looking for would need to be done. And even before that, ensuring that we allow them to come into the country and immediately allow them the right to stay here for 6 months, as opposed to what currently happens where you give them a 3-month permit to stay, and then in the middle of it, they then have to go and hustle in town to try to get the additional. So those I know are some of the things that are actually are what the industry itself wants, and what I know discussions did in fact take place, which is why this in particular industry factored in so heavily in the budget. And again, it's not one that we're starting from zero. It is one that if we simply remove the bureaucratic impediments, it is an industry that we could start to see the results in a very quick time. And if I could just add, the first people in the yachting industry says to me, in the early 2000s, a young man living in let's say Laventille, for example, could jump in a bus, come out in Chagaramas and earn 150, 200 US just to clean 1 or 2 boats. I mean, that is, when we compare that to what we're offering through CPEP and URP, this certainly is a better option. In addition to which, there are so many sustainable job opportunities that are linked to the yachting and the marine repairs industry. All of the technical aspect of looking after yachts, because they're very specific machinery and people who own yachts are very particular. So developing training programs to train persons in order to do the maintenance, training persons to be able to operate the boats, captains and all the different persons who actually man the boat is important. There's room for us to look at the whole issue of developing the charter aspect of the yachting industry, which is where real money is made. And this is where countries like St. Martin really make a lot of money. And you have persons that are not just sailing to come to you and come in with their boats, but you will have persons who travel via air, land in your country, spend a few days in your hotels, then charter a boat, sail around the islands, and then come back here. We are so well positioned, given our proximity to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which has the best sailing waters in the Caribbean, Grenada, etc., that is another aspect of the industry that we can look at developing in a lot more significantly. I hope I answered your question. But again, at the end of the day, it is how fast the government acts in terms of implementation. And that we have to underscore.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sajuan. We have another question going back to customs again, hoping it sparks the discussion some more. Who will challenge customs over time? We can go to a 3-shift system and remove overtime. This is coming from Red Cheaping from the main floor. He is with Gordon Grant, GG Logistics. Anyone wants to give it a go? Or who do we think should champion the customs overtime at least?
Yes, Aidan. Yeah. Thank you, Rhett, for that question. So we have, again, well, there has been a newly appointed Comptroller of Customs, and we have attended a meeting with that Comptroller. And that was one of the issues that we would have tabled with regards to the several complaints that we have received over the years with regards to the customs overtime. And so we would have tabled that. The new Comptroller has recognized the interpretations and the invoicing for overtime by his team members. And he actually said that he is going to undertake with his legal team, and he has created a committee to review and to roll out to his team with regards to what is actually required to be implemented as overtime, and so that there is the output of it is to have a standardized means and a transparent means of the invoicing of the overtime. And yes, with regards to that 24/7 type operations, our industry is a 24/7 operation, and similarly customs and other statutory agencies that provide critical trade facilitation for our industry should also be operating that roster system. So yes, again, those are points that we would have advocated. The Shipping Association, again, continues to advocate for those matters. But we are seeing some, at least there has been a recognition of the issue of overtime and the inconsistent incurrence of overtime and invoicing of overtime by the comptroller.
Thank you, Troy.
If I could just add, but we have precedents in terms of this. I mean, Trinidad and Tobago is dominated by energy sector where the plants on that estate run 24/7. They don't sleep, they don't shut down. So that there is that example to look at and say, well, okay, if you're saying that you want this to run in that same way, then it should be not so hard to say, okay, we have a model that we can look at in terms of doing similarly.
I think we have a number of models in a number of areas we can look at that could bring benefit, and they've been there for some time. Is really, as we keep saying, the implementation. How do we get it done? I see a hand up by Mr. Brown.
Yes, I was going to make
Panelist.
a very simple point here. In addition to what has been said, I mean, we can't tiptoe around this issue, right? We can't run a modern economy, right, on a sort of 8 to 4 or 12-hour job. That's impossible, right? So let's not beat around the bush on this, right? We have to run a 24/7 operation at the port if we want it to be successful. Full stop. That's the first start. With respect to the model, none of the point leases companies are unionized. None. That's key difference, right?
Sure.
So if we want to watch it go, we have to address this, and that's why I said, none of these things were anticipated. They're not new, all right? So, and I understand what the minister is trying to say in the budget. I want to say these are well known, right? But we're going to have to treat them in very much the same way we had to treat it NIS. You had to take the bull by the horns, make a decision, and get it
done. I agree with that 100%.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Kevin, I see you have a hand raised as well. You have a question? Kevin Chukwan.
Morning. Thank you all. I was unable to put my question in the Q&A section, so please indulge me. So it's to anyone on the panel. And what I wanted to get some perspective on is, what do you anticipate to be the effect on the average citizen? I get the feeling that a lot of these measures are giving, but they're also taking. And at the end of the day, my overarching feeling is that we're going to end up taking home less disposable income. So for instance, you have the lower fuel price at the pump, but then you have the increased NIS rate. You have the measures where the landlords are now having to register, and then you have the taxation coming from it. But then the expectation is that these landlords are going to increase their rental rates, so I'm now going to be paying higher rental rates. And then the other question is, what mechanisms are there in place that are going to incentivize these landlords to actually register and come forward? You have the carrot and the stick. So perhaps something could have been implemented where you offer an incentive to a renter to declare that I am renting and declare who my landlord is. And then in that way, you have access to know who is renting. Because my feeling is the landlords are going to say, well, you know what? go report me. I'm not going to register and I'm going to hold your rental rate.
Which would be a good byproduct if that happens.
Yeah, so if the last thing happens, then the government will lose out in terms of the revenue it hopes to gain from the initiative, but the regular person is not going to be impacted. At the end of the day, I think that, we all are aware that many of the initiatives, even though it targets those that the government believes can better afford, could potentially be, translated to the average person, and overall the impact might be more. But that said, the government has to finance its budget somehow. And as I keep saying, as far as I know, I don't think any minister of finance or prime minister have a money tree that they could just go shake down. And we have to accept where this economy is, where Dr. Arjun really provide us with the data to show the decline, the extreme decline that has taken place in this economy. And I think to the benefit of the budget, you really have to spend the time thinking through it to arrive at what the conclusion you have arrived at. Because if you just kind of take it and think in terms of the initiative presented, it's kind of like, I feel good, government has given me some things, but it is those of us who will sit down and really analyze the details will kind of realize what could potentially happen. So just, I think in this moment of feel good kind of, bringing back some level of confidence, I think we really just have to kind of run with that in the moment until the reality sets in.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Sajuan.
I would just like to add to that, and it was, as somebody in an agency that is funded by the government, what India was saying is, it really, you have to look at it that way, because when we have, obviously you have to do your plans and give it to the line ministry. It was like, we had to do plans for like 20-25% less cut, and at the end of the, we got more or less the same. That and that goes at least for the Ministry of Trade and Industry, trade, investment and tourism. So there are consequences that you want to get the same budget that you were getting last time, but you might have got less. It might have been a 20-25% less for a lot of the agencies that has a lot of work, for instance, in the ministry, Global Trinidad and Tobago. But I think they got more or less the same or even more. So because they obviously looked at the long term, what that agency is supposed to do. So there would be some consequences by the end of the day. I also would have preserved some jobs, I would imagine, as well too. So that it could have been, if you as a realistic approach, it could have been, we're not going to do this, we're not going to raise no money, but then the 25, all these agencies would be less money as well too. So there's always a give and take with budgets, and at least in my perspective, at least the Ministry of Trade's perspective, it would have been a lot of similar type allocations, which may not have been the case if not for finding some other ways to raise income.
Thank you, Bevan. We have been really good, so I want to make sure we start and finish on time. So one more question, and we still have the vote of thanks. But this is from Andrew Nurse, from the main room. Based on the budget presentation, can we expect an earlier review of budget figures before the mid-year review? I don't know if everyone wants to lead a discussion on it. I think it's a good idea, but can we expect it?
So, I would say my expectation is, unless the issue of the 10% comes in, I don't necessarily see that happen, because I believe that within ministries they could probably do let me get it to Bevan, maybe you could help me. They could probably take monies from different things in order to rally. And I think
I forgot the name, but yes, it's
transfer
transfer within.
Transfer within the different headings.
From heads, transfer within.
In order to meet, and then we have the mid-year review, which would then make the adjustment. That has been standard, and I don't see why the minister would necessarily deviate from that particular approach. I don't see that there's anything to be gained from that. If he does that earlier, then he would be sending some signals, which I don't really think that he would want. And if I could see him holding.
The term is via, but I don't expect him to come earlier. But
Okay.
the reality is this. The budget numbers speak to $3.1 billion in the previous year, $730 million in the current year. That's 3.8 million between the 4 or 5 unions that have come to an agreement. All right. PSA is the largest element. So, and those agreements are at 5%. So to start off with, 3.1 and 7 multiplied by 2 is 3.8, right? Twice. So you have to put that in. The $3 billion not in the budget now. 700,000 is. So 3.1 multiplied by 2 is 6, right? Taking the factor the PSA, in terms of how the PSA is going to be calibrated, that's about another 6, right? So we're really talking the budget, and that's my problem. I'm a numbers man by definition. I'm in the business of finance. So when we present budgets, then we have to have a realistic expectation of what takes place. And if we leave out those 2 numbers, they aren't small. They aren't small. And we're not even talking about the effect of the employer element of the NIS contribution. Hang on. You made a budget announcement. You said you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and you don't have it in the numbers, and you tell me the budget is going to be $4 billion, a $3.8 billion shortfall. I mean, you have to be serious. If I want to be serious, if I want to take you seriously about all the others, don't try to soft soap me, right? When we know that it's going to be difficult. And quite frankly, there's no way you could take you could rub off here and transfer here to meet that kind of shortfall.
I agree.
Valmiki will
I agree with you. And that's why I said, removing that big one for other things.
And Valmiki looked at me with shock on the Monday before the budget when I told him what I expected. Right? Right now, I'm giving you the reasons why I expected it.
Thank you very much. So a lively debate. I thank the panelists very much for their contribution and their openness, and for the Shipping Association for putting on this wonderful webinar. It's growing from strength to strength. Just to wrap things up, we would have the vote of thanks delivered by the Vice President of the Shipping Association of Trinidad and Tobago, Kevin Chukwan.
Thank you. I need my video to be, yeah, I think it's up now. So my role is really simple here, is to give a vote of thanks, but I wanted to just really give a couple quick thoughts. So similar to many of the other attendees of this webinar, many of us who are attending the CSA conference at overseas in Suriname at the time of the budget reading. So we were not able to take any presentation live. I personally got a couple bullet points throughout, but this session has really proven to be very invaluable for me to get some more perspective and what to expect. I thank the exceptional panel for their varied perspectives, professional presentations. I describe it as insightful, informative, thought-provoking, and a lot of takeaways. But for me, there are 2 main things that I walk away with, and they're questions. But how do we translate the verbal commitments into action and deliverables? And then the second thing is, optimism is great, but reality is the final judge. So that's what my main takeaways are. So I want to thank the panelists, Dr. Sajiwan, Dr. Arjun, Mr. Brown, Mr. Narayan Singh, and our own very president, Mr. Prasad. Thank you very much for your insightful presentations. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our sponsors, Shipco Transportation and Bridge Control Services. We thank you for your continued support. And of course, for all of the attendees for making the time to take part in this webinar. I also thank the organizers for the event. And I think it has exceeded my expectations. So what we'll be doing is that we'll be sending a supplementary billing to all of the attendees because we think that, you got more than you actually paid for. So you can look out to get that bill from us. But thank you all for your presentation and your attendance. Just 2 quick housekeeping notes. We have upcoming before the end of the year, our annual 6K. So we're looking forward for your full participation. That's going to be on the 14th of December. And then in 2026, the 26th and the 27th of March, we have our AGM, Shipping and Logistics Conference coming up. It's going to be a signature event, so you're going to be hearing more from us. Thank you all for your attendance. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. God bless.
Thank you, everyone.